Swinburne University of Technology.
Welcome PhD candidates of the Artefact and Exegesis method of PhD. Today we're here to talk about progress review. Not only do you have the pleasure of your supervisors, but you also have the pleasure of interacting with other academics through the research committees so that they can look at your work and hopefully be supportive and help take you forward. The first progress review is confirmation, and I'll be talking about that. There's a second progress review, which Carolyn will talk about, a third progress review, which Dominique will talk about, and possibly a fourth, which is just joy to hear. But before we go to the progress review as such, I'd like you to listen to Dr. Julian Nowitz talking to you about the role of the supervisors.
Okay, great. Well, obviously the supervisors are there to keep you on track and to will keep you up to date as to when you have to go through these different review stages. And of course will also be factored into, I think, the development of a timeline close to the start of the PhD, which will keep you on track throughout all the different confirmation steps. I think the important thing to remember about the confirmation process, though, is that it's really there to help the student, help to keep the PhD student and their supervisor on track and up to date as to how the thesis is developing, and also gives you an opportunity to present your work to a larger academic audience than just your supervisor at least once each year in your candidature, which can help to identify problems or areas of research that maybe you hadn't previously thought of or explored, your supervisor hadn't been able to pick up on, other possible readings or directions for research. So the ultimate aim is not to be scared about these or anxious about these particular confirmation stages, but to think of them as an opportunity to present and test your ideas for a larger audience and make sure that your thesis is developing well.
And students like them. They actually come away at the end saying, wow, I learnt so much, that was great, I feel invigorated. So as supervisors, we often feel, we find after they've presented, there'll be a big flurry of activity, the students all inspired. So whilst you may feel a bit anxious going in, even though you shouldn't, you'll be rewarded afterwards because you'll really have taken a lot away from the process.
Because often, like, writing a PhD can be a quite isolating experience. I mean, it shouldn't be, but it's the way it often falls down. A lot of students often feel that they're only sort of communicating their ideas to their supervisor or supervisors. And the confirmation process actually offers a much wider forum to present those ideas, and it connects you to a larger academic community, even just to that university. It can potentially connect you to other PhD students, and so, as Carolyn says, it can really lead to a lot of new activity and new directions.
Yes, and it's really important to understand that although the PhD is such a big task and such a challenge, it's only really getting to the bottom of the Mount Everest camp of research, that it sets you up to go on to do further research. It's not the final end of research. It's you doing a major research project and showing that you can do it, and then going on to do other research. Now, it's a little different with the Artefact and Exegesis, because so many of the people who come to us are coming as practitioners, but many of them also go on to become academics, so that it has those other resonances for the research committees that run these progress reviews. The first of the progress review is the confirmation towards the end of your first year, or roundabout then, depending on what timelines can be met by the research committees. And this confirmation of candidacy enables you to really put together the work that you've done on the artefact, which should be pretty well underway after 12 months, pretty much wrapped up in its first iteration. It also then enables you to see what issues have arisen from your journaling or your note-taking that you've made during that process of making the artefact. And the issues that have arisen from making the artefact will then become part of your scholarly research for the exegesis, and in that way the two parts of the Artefact and Exegesis PhD will speak to one another. So that confirmation has very specific things that you have to do. And they may change, and so I'm not going to articulate them here. You will get notification of those from the research committee as to what they are at the particular time, but generally they are that the artefact is concluded or close to the first iteration, and that you have an outline of the exegetical material, and you have a very good, strong bibliography, which is very strong in scholarship. I like to see my students have at least 3/4 of their bibliography is scholarly bibliography. So you're not just talking about your genre of work or your area of practice and other people within that area of practice and other scholarly comments on that area of practice. You're actually going forward also to make scholarly comments on the issues that have arisen as you've been doing your practice-led research. So I think that sort of covers the first one a bit, doesn't it?
And also you're usually expected to give a bit of a map or a plan of your progress in the future. Yes. So how you see the next 2 years mapping out, you know, at what point will you start to write up various chapters of the exegesis, and what sort of, are you going to go to any conferences? Is there any particular needs that you find, that you predict may be causing trouble for you in your candidature? So it's a way of flagging, you know, if there may be some need for delaying submission later on as well. So it's very important to fill in the timeline section in a good amount of detail.
And we're terribly keen on timelines because they do work. In our experience of supervision, if you work backwards and say, I want to put this in 3 years, which we like people to do, but you do have the time that you have been given. But if you want to finish it in 3 years, work backwards and see exactly when you might get things in. Of course, things will happen, but you just don't take any notice of that. You know, your dog dies, your family goes overseas, etc., etc. You just keep going on your PhD.
Yeah, it's also a good place to put things in, like I'm applying for an ethics clearance.
Yes.
So in case that ethics clearance takes a bit longer than you expect, it's all there for the on record for the research people and organisations and committee to see, and to be able to say, okay, yeah, I can understand that this has taken a little bit longer than you thought because the research ethics clearance was a bit longer than initially expected, but it's all in there. So it's good to be as accurate as possible.
That's right. It's like a mini examination, really, isn't it? And it sets you up for the next stage, which is stage 2, which I think Carol is going to talk to us about.
So stage 2 is really looking at the sorts of improvements that you would like to do to your undertake for your artefact compared to where it was the year before. So you're really coming in a year later and saying, okay, I've done this and this. This is what I would like to improve upon in the next year. So this is my plan for moving forward. And you're also looking at giving an outline of the exegesis in a bit more detail than you would have in your first confirmation of candidature. And you're also looking at methodology. And that's really the first time that you're expected to talk with authority about the sort of methodologies that you might be using, whether that's practice-led research, feminism, post-colonialism,
and theoretical positions.
And theoretical positions, that's it. Yes, so which post-colonialism fits into that as well. So looking at the sorts of theoretical frameworks and scaffolding that are going to sit under or in the artefact, and that you're going to explicitly discuss in the exegesis in some way. You also need to talk about the interaction between the artefact and the exegesis, and a little bit about the journal. So talking really at this second stage about how these two objects, the artefact and the exegesis, are not just separate, that they can interact. And often in your first year, you'll be really, often, not always, you'll often be looking at completing the first draft of the artefact. So you might be thinking just about story or about construction of this piece of creative output. And the second stage asks you to really look at some of the issues that have come out of that creative process and expanding it into exegetical discussion. So it's moving you towards the exegesis a little bit more. And so you're often doing things like handing in around 2,000 words of covering these things that we've talked about, and possibly a sample from your artefact or from your exegesis of around 5,000 words or so. And it's important to remember that at each of these stages there is a report and a presentation. And the report is what you're giving outlines for. Presentation, you have a little bit more flexibility, but you are meant to cover certain things that are ticked off in the report as well. So it's kind of a vocalization of that. And the other thing to bear in mind is that at each stage you will also need to give some sort of sample example. If it's a novel, you might be giving 5,000 words, or if you're at stage 2, some exegesis, or equivalent in images. So if your artefact is a set of photographs, you'll be presenting a certain number of images as part of the report.
Thanks, Carolyn. Well, you know, there are quite a lot of very explicit things for you to do, but the important thing to realise also is that you will use these in your work. They're not another piece of work. They're the work that you are doing, that you bring together in a specific way for this, and it is a personal presentation, and you are not supposed to have any electronic support unless it is an electronic presentation for your artefact. So you probably need to think about yourself as presenting, as how you face the audience and how you interact with them, which can be a challenge for people who aren't used to doing it. So that's worth thinking about and perhaps practicing with your supervisor. And Dominique will now talk to us about the third stage.
The third stage occurs usually about 6 months before you submit. So the key idea is that you have to convince the panel that you are ready to submit. In a way, third stage mirrors the first stage, that is the confirmation, but in what I like to call a three-dimensional way. So you are going to emphasize the articulation between the artifact and the exegesis, and what you are going to have to emphasize is your contribution to knowledge. So that's probably where I would start. That is from the contribution to knowledge, and then write your essay in that direction. What are the requirements? The requirements are usually you talk for about 20 minutes, and then the panel asks questions, and at the last stage you have to submit a little bit more of material. It's about 5,000 words. And we like to have a balance between the exegesis and the artifact. So, for instance, 2 chapters of the exegesis and 2 chapters of the artifact. It doesn't really matter if you are not that far in the exegesis, provided you have a very clear plan and very detailed table of contents, because some students tend to spend a lot more time on the artifact and find that the theoretical material is sedimenting in their head, and often they write the exegesis very quickly. But as I said in the beginning, it's a matter of convincing the panel that you are ready to submit. Ideally, we like to have a full draft of the exegesis at that stage. But as I say, everybody works in different ways. And sometimes, even though you might have a whole draft of the exegesis, it's an opportunity for you to revise it, to trim it down, because it often happens that people get a little carried away and find it difficult to trim back.
And it's not such a big deal if a student doesn't do as well as they'd hoped at a progress review. What are some of the things that the student can be asked to do if they haven't gone as well as they'd hoped?
The actual progress review is generally in a small room. It generally has the 3 academics who are on the review panel just sitting in front of the candidate. And then generally the supervisors are there, and sometimes there are a couple of other academics and other PhD students. I would like to see more there because it's such a learning curve for everybody. But at the end of the presentation, the 3 academics who are reviewing the presentation will go into a room and talk to one another and write a report. They'll talk to the student, they'll talk to the supervisors. Now, there are possibilities in this report that you might need to go to another stage if the 3 academics are not really sure that you are where you ought to be. So that means it goes to the research Deputy Dean of Research, and you will speak with her or him. They are very supportive people. They are there not in any way to make it more difficult for you, but merely to say, look, you know, you haven't quite reached in the eyes of these people. Will we talk through what sorts of issues they've identified and see how you and your supervisors feel about that. As Julian said in the beginning, I really trust the supervisor, not that I don't trust the research review panel, but really trust your supervisor. They will work with the research review panel and they will work very positively. The research review panel will throw up different ideas and different issues, some of which will be very useful, some of which you will consider and say, well, I can't go there. Remember, you cannot do everything in your artefact and exegesis, especially your exegesis. Someone wrote, and it's a very useful thing for you to look at, it's not the Nobel Prize, it's a PhD. And that's the truth of the matter, that be confident and use the review to take your confidence to the next level. Is that about wrap up?
I think so.
Thank you to Dr. Julian Novitz, Associate Professor Dominique Heck, Dr. Karen Beasley, Professor Josie Arnold. We look forward to talking to you again and good luck with your candidacy.
This has been a Swinburne production.